So thank you so much. Now, I'm obviously a little bit biased, but I believe that most things, especially sustainability progress, can be improved through better conversation. And that is exactly why I'm so pleased to be hosting this session today. We want to help you close the gap between strategy and behavior. And over the next hour, I'm hoping to give you not just a boost in hope and inspiration and optimism on this Blue Monday, but I'm also hoping that you can walk away today with some really practical, tangible ideas to help you bring more action into 2026. So I'm really honoured to be joined today by such great and experienced guests to help bring this conversation to life. And we are going to dive straight into introducing them, because I think that the more time you can have with them, the better. I would love to maybe give Karen the shout out to kick us off. Would you like to tell us, Karen, how you've got to this point today in your career and some of the highlights of the things that you've done that has brought you to this point?
Yeah, thank you very much, Sally, and thanks very much for injecting some energy into this this Green Monday. I think we're all appreciating it. Yeah, so with regards to my highlights and my background, I moved into environmental issues and sustainability communications in the kind of second half of my career, and been very fortunate to work at WWF and also Unilever, where I've worked on just a variety of global issues, attending UN events, which is a real highlight, particularly the climate COPs, Davos, which also kicks off. I'm watching very closely this week. I think, and in the last year, I moved into setting up my own consultancy, which has been really interesting in these times. But in terms of highlights, I think for me, seeing the issues on both sides of the fence, from the NGO side and also from the private sector side, in this quite kind of tense and highly pressurized time, has been super interesting. So really happy and interested to explore those issues on the call.
Fantastic. And I think we are very honoured to have you with us today, because that's, I know from the briefing call, we have so much experience that we can pick your brains on today. And Tors, you have equal credibility in this space. Do you want to tell us some of your background and experience, because you've got all sorts to bring to us today as well?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Sally. And thank you so much for inviting me onto this session. And I'm delighted to see so many of you here. So as it says, I'm a business strategist and communications expert. I've been working in the field for 20 years. I started out working in sort of CSR, when it was called that, way back when. And I would work to promote organisations like BT giving huge oversized checks to small, villages and charities and so on. So it was very transactional, and I'm really excited about how sustainability, responsible business, the whole green agenda has just grown and blossomed over those past 2 decades. So I work really with leaders now to help them navigate some of that change, to help them build resilience in their organisations. And then personally as well, I hope I'll touch on it in some of the conversations we have today. I also run a charity where I live, down in Hazelmere. The charity is called Love Hazelmere, Hate Waste, and we exist to make waste-free living normal, the norm, normalising it. So I lead a team of 100 to help deliver the Repair Cafe, the Library of Things, and the Community Fridge.
Fantastic. And I believe you won an award for some of that last year.
We did. We won 2 awards, one from the, very well remembered, thank you. Yes, one from the BBC and one from the Global Good Awards, which have just opened for entry, I think. So a wonderful awards to enter as well. Yes, we were delighted.
Fantastic. And honestly, it's a reminder to us all as well that it's not just conversations, it's real action that you're doing there as well. And that as individuals, we can still have that massive impact where we can really get, and you've got your local community, really 100 volunteers getting action in place. So I am really delighted. I think I will stop sharing the screen, and do feel free. We'll share the LinkedIn links later on again. But a very, very warm welcome to you both. I feel like we're in really safe hands for this conversation today, and thanks both for joining us. I'd like to get our conversation started, and there's two main topics I would like to focus on today. The first one is about understanding where sustainability progress breaks down. So how it gets lost between strategy and intention versus action, and what do we need to do to close that gap. And then the second part of the conversation I want to have is, and I feel very responsible for this, because as a communications expert, I feel this is where we can play a massive part. But the second part of the conversation I want to have is, how does communication itself perhaps get in the way of action? So there's overload and sort of competing messages, and that's perhaps sometimes causes fatigue and then disengagement. And then, you know, maybe there's a way that we can be more intentional about doing less and actually driving more action. So two really important topics for today. I think we will get straight on. And I think I'm going to start by exploring this gap between sustainability ambition and then the action of everyday actions. So Karen, can I come to you first? From your experience, where do you see organizations most commonly getting stuck when it comes to general sustainability action?
So I think where I see most organizations getting stuck is in the complexity of this area. Sustainability is, you know, inherently multi-layered, and without sort of clear communication that's relevant, can quickly become quite overwhelming, particularly as it's been a hot topic in the media over the last couple of years, due to perceived rollbacks and so on. So we have a responsibility to as communicators to really look at those issues and think about how we can clearly communicate them to internal audiences. I mean, in my experience, I found that employees do really care very deeply, but they are potentially overloaded. As you point to the piece about so much content and communication, and potentially not given sort of simple and meaningful ways to act. I mean, talking really from a sort of strategic point, obviously with sustainability strategies, for them to deliver most ROI, they need to really be built into the business strategy themselves. But I do feel that there's a big sort of reservoir of goodwill within organizations that's not really being tapped into, just because that internal clarity or engagement might not be as good as it could be. So I think there's so much more opportunity to work on that and build that momentum, with that internal communications piece, which I know we're going to go on and talk about more.
Thank you. I love that phrase. I'm just going to pull that one out, reservoir of goodwill. And I think that's something I'd love everyone to walk away from today, because it gives me hope and optimism, but I think it gives me this, okay, how are we going to tap into that opportunity? So Tors, maybe if I come to you, where do you think things get sort of lost in translation in your experience when it comes to sort of particularly sustainability comms?
Yeah, and just building on Karen's point as well, I think that's absolutely right. There is this, you know, the whole point of the webinar is that there's a real goodwill. People want to do the right thing, but there are so many messages coming at us. It's about, how do people then cut through? How do brands cut through so that people can do the thing that's right and worthwhile doing? I read a really interesting stat that only 12% of consumers actually trust brands to keep their sustainability promises, which is that's really low. But then on the flip side, actually, there's a real challenge with brands not being able to trust consumers. You know, I'm sure everybody on the call has seen statistics around actually, will consumers pay more for, you know, sustainable goods? And every consumer always ticks, oh yes, of course I'll pay more. And then the reality, you know, of course you work on a product, you launch it, get it out into the market, and of course it doesn't land where you wanted it to, and there aren't the sales that you wanted. And we see that all the time. So there is this real kind of big trust gap actually of what, you know, brands and consumers expect and demand of each other. But just coming back to your question as well, Sally, what I'm quite taken with is that this word sustainability, this has been around for decades. You know, I think it was 1987, cast your mind back, when the Brundtland report was launched, which is the first real time that we saw this word sustainable development have any kind of resonance and meaning. And it was a word that phrasing was really born out of science. You know, it was a report that drew a lot on kind of scientific research. But the reality of the word sustainability is it's deeply emotional. You know, people care very, very much about what that word means and how it translates into their day to day and how they interpret it. Even with today, you know, shifting from Blue Monday to Green Monday and all of this kind of hope and optimism, that's all emotional. And the disconnect, I think, comes in that we have a word that's come out of very, you know, science heavy jargon. It's very loaded and it's difficult to understand and break down, as you said, Karen. And then you, on the other side of that, you have this very emotional reaction to it. And that's the huge opportunity for communicators to take advantage of. So I'll give you one example. I referenced at the top that I run it's essentially a behaviour change charity, and this was fundamentally my sort of social experiment, if you like, to see if you launched something into the wide world that would enable people to deliver a sustainable behaviour change, would they actually do it? So the repair cafe, the language that we use is you can come to the repair cafe and fix anything that's broken. We run the library of things, so it's hosted in the library. So much like you'd borrow a book, you can come and borrow an item like a hedge trimmer or a leaf blower or a sewing machine without having to buy it yourself.
Just got a side issue.
And then if you can collect surplus food would otherwise have been wasted. So we never, ever, ever talk about sustainability. We only talk about the benefit to the customer and to the consumer and the people. And within that, we're driving behaviour change. So that hopefully that gives you a tangible example of what I mean by that as well.
I'm going to pick up on a couple of points because I think that they're both so useful in this conversation. One is about trust, because I've seen it. Obviously, I work massively in the sort of people and culture space, and we've been doing things like employee opinion surveys and satisfaction surveys, etc., for yonks. But there's definitely a sense that trust in leadership is down. I think if we look at the Edelman surveys, we see trust in brands is down, trust in governments and MPs and things like that is down. You know, and it's no surprise when you look at the fact that there's fake news, and now with AI as well, it's incredibly difficult now to even understand, is that video real or is that a complete, you know, deep fake? So I think trust is under more pressure than it's ever been under. And of course, one of the things we're really talking about today is action. And of course, when it comes to trust, it's about words meeting that action. And also sometimes it's like the don't tell me you're funny, make me laugh. And maybe we actually have to demonstrate what we're doing in sustainability so that we're really demonstrating that ability to trust us, because it's not just words. So I think there's something we can all take away from this year is how are we embedding trust? How are we encouraging our employees and our everybody to trust what we say? And the second thing you said, Tors, and I loved it, is about science versus emotion, because we're human beings. We are not algorithms. You know, you can't set us and code us and say, you know, we've said this, so you're going to believe that, or you're going to do this. I've always loved working with a particular gentleman who's a behavioral economist. So he'll say, it doesn't matter what the economists want to happen. It's what we do as humans that makes a difference. And he has this wonderful story about when David Cameron once announced something to do with the housing market, which was going to happen in 3 years' time, but it affected the housing market just like that, because everybody immediately behaved in a different way, and for no real reason, because nothing had changed, but we had changed our confidence, or something had changed. So this thing that we've got to do this year is tap into the emotion of our audiences and go, how can we inspire them? A bit like we are today. How can we feel hope and optimism on a Blue Monday? We've got to tap into that psyche of humans, because it is the humans that have got to make the change, right? Fascinating stuff, guys. I feel like I must get back onto our questions. But I had a question for both of you, really, which was about, if we were able to be a fly on the wall when you've got, on the one hand, a sustainability subject matter expert, so someone who's leading on sustainability. I'm sure on the call we've got many of them. And they were briefing a comms lead, and we have plenty of those on the call. And we're in that sort of moment where we're having that discussion on what is the brief, what might we see and hear, and what might we want to recommend in that conversation. And this is a juicy conversation, I know, to have, but how are we advising our comms leads and our sustainability experts to communicate better with themselves? Who would like to take that one first?
I don't mind jumping in.
Go for it.
I mean, in my experience, there's lots of buzzwords and acronyms in that initial conversation. And as a communicator, we know quite a lot, and we're expert in our field, but we absolutely should be asking the questions. But I mean, I think, in terms of recent experience around these conversations, the top thing for me is, don't wait until everything's been achieved. Communicate how we're progressing and what we still need to do. I think previously, maybe a couple of years ago, and then we used to wait until we've achieved that goal, and then we'd talk about it and how we did it. But given the kind of the state of the world and where we are now, I think that progress is quicker if we're talking about the blockages, the barriers we're up against. And it takes a bit of courage sometimes to kind of have this conversation with experts, because quite often they've founded that project and they want to see it right to the end before they talk about it. So that takes a bit of consultancy sometimes. But I think, given the external context we're in, that's really quite an important bit of the conversation. But also talking about the kind of the how, where are we going overall, but then really important, obviously, to not overstate and be clear on how these steps fit in with broader progress. And obviously it's really important as communicators that we're bringing that kind of contextual backdrop as well. But all these kind of things play into that theme of trust, Sally, that you're talking about, being honest and accurate, but not being afraid to have the difficult conversation, which I think takes some courage, especially this year, because there's a lot of things that require some clarity in this agenda, which we're probably not going to get. So we're going to have to move forwards and make action and impact regardless. Yeah. So I think courage is a kind of key word for me in 2026 in those conversations.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah. And I think there's this whole essence of not letting perfection get in the way of progress. And I know, especially when you've both worked for large brands like Unilever, it's very difficult for anyone to accept and approve that we're going to talk about something that isn't finished and isn't perfect, and we don't know all the answers. And there's a lot of risk in that. And I really love that you've pulled out this courage piece, because we sometimes need to say, we're not there yet, but this is where we're at. And I think that's one thing for everyone to take away, is have the courage to talk about where we are on the journey, because we might not get to the destination in 26 or 27 or even 2030 or whatever. So let's talk about the journey, how we are doing. And Tors, you were also nodding your head. Let's hear your
I was going to add, the reason I believe that happens is because historically and still up to present day, sustainability is seen as a competitive advantage. And we have moved from a place where in the very early days, you could launch a new, change to your product or something else embedded within your service that would give you a competitive advantage. You'd have a new feature and that would give you that boost. But the challenge with that is that we need to move to a place of collaborative advantage, because exactly as you said, Karen, we can't solve this one brand at a time. We have to solve this as a collective, as an industry, as cross industry. And that is almost alien to us in the way that we've worked previously. So it's why organisations like the School of Systems Change are now having so much more success, because they're solving the problem rather than, looking at, right, how can I adapt my product to fit a changing world. And I think, again, Karen, you just hit the nail on the head that requires a huge amount of courage to move from this, right, how can I move from a place where I need some kind of competitive advantage to looking at collaborative advantage and how collectively we can solve some of these challenges together, particularly when marketing teams, I'm sure a lot of you on the call, are still measured on ROI and are still measured on all of these old metrics that don't quite fit the way in which we need to communicate now to make the progress that we need to make.
I love this. In the B Corp environment, we are very good at collaboration over competition. We have some really great networks. I run an agency alliance for about 20 B Corp agencies, and we're essentially competitors, but we're collaborating. There's a phenomenal one on beauty, a beauty coalition, if you like. And, they're doing fantastic work, because packaging in beauty is a big problem. And if they can work on it together, I think that's awesome. And it reminds me, and I think this tale of woe wouldn't have happened if we have the Beauty Coalition, but a particular brand of toothpaste made some sustainable packaging, and of course it wasn't so shiny, it was a bit dull. And when it hit the shelves, guess what, we lost a point on sales and whatever, and it didn't take very long before that sustainability move was retracted because it was detrimental to sales. Now, if all of the toothpastes had gone with that sustainability move, then maybe we wouldn't have had that problem, because then they would all be less shiny. And quite honestly, as consumers, we need to get used to less shiny, So yeah, I think collaboration is a really great one. Before we move on to the next question, and I think it's going to be really linked to this as well, I just don't want to overlook something else you said, Karen, a minute ago, which is about buzzwords and acronyms. And I think we've already used the word jargon. I mean, this is a problem, right? In this topic, I think we would all probably agree that's something we've got to take away. Many of these scientific acronyms, and they're slightly loaded. Even things like net zero and carbon neutral, they're loaded in terms of what they all mean. And to begin with, we were sort of flinging them out like buzzwords, but realistically, then we started to go, oh, hang on a minute, is that greenwashing? I would surmise that many people don't really fully understand the definitions. What do you both think on that?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, the terms like net zero have become highly politicized recently, and that's another conversation in itself. But yeah, I mean, even experts in the climate space have said to me, I mean, even though I know what these are, I don't want to read communications that are full of all of this technical language, because I don't even find it that clear. So I think when you've got the experts saying that to you, then you realize how hard it is for non-experts. So people are like employees in businesses that are just trying to understand, well, what's the goal of our business around sustainability, and how can I understand it more easily, which is, where we need to make a lot more effort in the internal comms side to kind of drive home some of this relevance. And there's so many creative ways that we can do that. But yeah, it's such I mean, I see so many people investing in like influencing in budget in marketing influencing, and that's just going up. And then at the same time, we see communications teams becoming quite squeezed. So you do have to wonder, is that kind of, that resource also being used to help people internally understand where you're going in sustainability?
And I'd love to, this is my next question, because I think it's absolutely critical we do that. If we had a frontline employee doing a field-based, on the shop floor, on the factory floor, in the warehouse type role, what might they be asking us all for when they comes to sustainability comms? Because let's hear, and I know we've got many people on the call who will have frontline employees. Now, if we want them to actually take action this year, what might they ask us for? So, shall we start with you, Tors?
Yeah,
on what you think.
I was just going to add as well, there's a really interesting report called The Language of Sustainability, and it talks about people's understanding from a consumer perspective of each of these words. From sustainable, net zero, circularity, green, eco, and mostly is pretty low on most of them. And I think it's fine to kind of band these words about. So, but it just feels to me that people are peacocking and sort of showing off, oh, look at all this lingo that I know. It doesn't mean anything unless you can connect to people. And this is exactly what employees want. I might not understand what my scope 3 emissions are in my business, but I do understand that if I throw all of my food waste into the bin that goes to landfill, that's a problem. So it's about, again, Karen, you used the word relevancy, and I think that's really, really astute, that we have to create relevance for people in their day-to-day. So I work a lot with organisations to help them to define and shape their vision. What is it that they want to become? What's the world that they want to create, and what's their part in creating it? And I often see that there is a gap between the vision that the organisation has and the employees or team members or partners' ability to not just understand that vision, but understand the relevance to their day-to-day world and how they can act on it. And there is often this big gap between those two things. So some really interesting statistics, for instance, there's a gap between what leadership believe as well and how employees believe that they can contribute. So nearly 2/3 of leaders think that their intentions and their actions are aligned. So what they want to achieve in their vision is actually being delivered. 2/3 of leadership teams believe that that's actually happening. Whereas when you ask employees the same question, only 1/4 of them agree. Like there's a huge gap between what we think's happening and what's actually going on the ground. And people want to be able to know that their actions count towards something. So the more that you can do to bridge that gap between, this is the vision that we've got for our organisation, whatever that is, whether that's a commercial one or it's a heavily, environmental or social focused one, you have to help people in providing them the bridge to their day-to-day role, whether they're a receptionist or whether they're a store, shop floor worker, or whether they're in C-suite. Because without that bridge, you've got no ability to make any progress at all. So being able to show them what those steps look like will be really, really key.
Yeah, absolutely. And Karen, you're nodding madly, so yes.
Yeah, totally agree.
Yeah,
no, totally agree. It's really good points. And I mean, one of the ways that I've done it in the past is to kind of bring complex topics to life, but through a completely different lens. So through human-centered storytelling. So quite complex topics like, what's happening in a supply chain, or what's happening with a commodity, or like scope 3, those sorts of things. But instead of using lots of data and, which is helpful to a certain degree, just spinning it completely and having a look at how it's affecting people in those scenarios. And those are sorts of bits of content when people have said to me, oh, I didn't realise that's how that impacted that community or that person's livelihood. I didn't know that, so all they've seen is probably quite, figure-led headlines or perhaps something controversial. But I've found that if you just look at it from a completely different perspective, it's the stories about people that the audiences remember, not the figures. Those are always things that people remember and tell you that they've seen. So, I mean, there's nothing new about that, but it's quite challenging in this complex environment to sometimes do that. So I think that's where the kind of less is more. You know,
I also think there's a little bit of fear around, like, we do have all these big words, we don't really know what they all mean, and so we're a bit fearful of changing the narrative because we want to stick to kind of what's out there. So we must use those words. And I think the opportunity is that because we know that sustainability is quite an emotional, you know, it can be quite a sensitive word, that the opportunity for businesses and the opportunity for brands is to understand what that means for them and how that plays into their values, so that they can really take ownership of their own story. And like exactly, Karen, as you've said, doing that through the stories of people, or much like I come back to the work that we do with the community fridge and the repair cafe, is that, you know, we enable people to lead more sustainable lives, but we don't really talk about how many carbon emissions you've saved, or we don't even really talk about how much food you've saved from landfill, but we talk about the benefits to the people that come and save some money, come and, you know, meet some new people and solve this social isolation issue. So that gets you out of the greenwashing piece, because you're doing what's right and emotional, and finding the connection between you and your brand and your audiences.
I'd love to pull out a few things. I mean, obviously, I'm going to pull out, Karen, that you've used the word storytelling, and as a communicator, you know, this is what we are great at. But if I refer back to your reservoir of goodwill earlier on, I also believe that what we have in our businesses is we have human libraries. We have millions of stories of everyday employees, and it's about finding those really golden stories and then, you know, getting everybody to understand those tangibly. I also think, Tors, you've mentioned taking ownership of your narrative as a business, and I think that's so critical, because what we have outside of our organizations is media headlines excuse me, that are designed to, you know, to put that fear back into everyone. And they have to sell newspapers, we have to be in a negative cycle that gives them a 24-hour new headline. And progress doesn't happen at 24-hour cycles. Only, you know, breaking news happens at 24-hour cycles. So we really have to encourage our own organizations to take ownership of their positive, optimistic, progress-led, human-led news stories and narratives. Talking of the news and the media, I have a question that I think we have to tackle, which is that because we're obviously all using AI a lot more, and so are everybody in the organizations, I wondered from a tangible, practical point, whether either of you have seen AI, specifically, you know, ChatGPT or somebody, doing a specific behavior or using words or phrases that you think could be a bit of a watch out for all of our comms leaders. Is there anything that you're like, no, chat, don't say that? Is it overly optimistic? Is it really a greenwashing thing? What's your experience of AI?
Yeah, if I was to jump in, I mean, for me, it's it can be quite passive and bland around this topic, and I think it's, you know, I think it's a good tool for sense making, but not necessarily fact making. It's certainly useful to a certain extent, but it does sometimes, you know, create content that sounds very similar. That piece Victoria is talking about in terms of creating your own narrative that's suitable, you know, that's your identity as a business. It's not going to do anything like that. You really need, like, you know, human centric skill set looking at that. And the other thing that I'm also quite cautious of is this kind of, we're in a time, particularly around climate change and these sorts of issues, where there's a lot of misinformation and disinformation. So I'd always look for referenced sources, making sure that what you're looking at is trustworthy. And there's loads of data out there showing how communicators are using these tools. I mean, I think it's like 95% or according to Cision or PR Week. So we're using them. So I think it's just about how you use them. But yeah, I think that kind of watch out. It can be sort of quite it's sort of doubt. There's a lot of doubts in there, making things very passive. It's not very active. That's my sort of sense of using it recently.
It's also quite homogenous. It's designed to sit right in the middle. It doesn't have a view either way.
Yeah.
I had a play around with it last week, and I asked it something along the lines of, I wanted to know some strap lines of some challenger brands, right? And I wanted brands that were inherently sustainable, but I wanted to understand how they talked about themselves. So I gave it an example of Smol, if you know Smol, the dishwashing by subscription, which is also a B Corp, laundry tablets and stuff. And theirs is all around a small revolution and, this sort of thing. And even with that example, the ones that it gave me, every single strapline had the word sustainability in. Now, bear in mind what I've just said twice about, not even using the word sustainability when it comes to my Love Hazelmere Hate Waste charity. I was quite disappointed that it didn't give me a single challenger brand that had anything. And, perhaps this is about the question that I had asked, but regardless, I just think AI works by a mathematical equation between the likelihood of two different words being next to each other. And when you bear that in mind, the likelihood of you getting any content out of it that's going to help shift the narrative on in terms of it becoming more emotional, less kind of factual, is just really unlikely. And exactly as Karen said, use it as a tool to sense check, make sure you've not missed anything, be cautious of misinformation, but you have to come back to what's right and true for you in terms of your tone of voice, your brand narrative, your values, your proposition, and create content that is reflective of that and starts from that base. Because otherwise you just end up so bland, as Karen says, middle of the road, because it's homogenous in the development of content.
Yeah, and I think that goes in the face of what we talked about earlier on with courage, and I think what you're saying there is it doesn't have an opinion either one way or another. It's sort of being Switzerland in that sense, and that's not really what we need in order to move things forward. We also have talked about trust, and if it's not going to sound authentic in your brand, then we're going to lose those points of trust. So sure, use AI to some extent. I'm sure we all are, but let's be really careful. It also does have a lot of misinformation in it, doesn't it? So let's be super cautious. I think we could talk about this all day, but I'd like to move on to our second bit of the topic conversation here, and rightly so, as we talk about AI, but how can communication itself add to the noise? And I think that we can all visualize, because unfortunately we've seen pictures of oceans full of plastic or mountains of clothing in a landfill. But my concern is that we're not necessarily stopping to visualize communication itself as an overload, because if we were to see this barrage of messages or this plethora of channels that we're maintaining, what would that visually look like? And would we then take action on it? Because at the end of the day, waste and overconsumption of anything is a problem, whether that is a physical thing or a digital thing. So let's see where we as communicators become part of the problem. Tors, can I come to you first? What do you think about too much information?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. And from my perspective, thinking about sustainability and all the research that's been going on since I've been working in this field, the amount of research has ballooned in the past 25 years. And, every day there's another report coming out. We should know so much about sustainability and what's going on, yet we seem to feel, less empowered to act than ever before. It's almost like we're, as you say, overloaded. We don't know where to begin on what good looks like. I came across some really interesting research that we're scrolling through our social media feeds. Obviously, we know that has reduced our attention spans probably to less than a goldfish. But in terms of the volume of content that we're scrolling through, every day, do we scroll through 100 feet of content? 200 feet of content, or 300 feet of content. Incredibly, I found this amazing. It's 300 feet of content we scroll through every single day. So your ability to gain cut through when you're, consuming that volume of media is huge. But the challenge you've got there is that we've got more information than we've ever had access to, but there's much less shared understanding. And I was obviously we've had these questions in advance, so I was reflecting on some of these earlier today, and I was thinking actually about the parallels with sustainability as a behaviour change. Fundamentally we need to create action, and there are other examples in our past where we have had widespread behaviour change campaigns. So cast your mind back to things like 5 a day. The government needed us to eat 5 fruits and vegetables every day. What was interesting in that actually is the actual statistic was that we should have 10, but they decided that was far too many, and it was better to just go for 5. And then other campaigns like Stop Smoking, for instance. And these were huge behaviour change campaigns with a very, very simple message. Just don't put cigarettes in your mouth. Just eat 5 fruits and vegetables every day. It's not that difficult. And yet the volume of communication that we needed to enable people to follow those very, very simple instructions was incredible. So I think actually, yes, there's a lot of communications, but I think the more that we can be very specific on what we need our audiences to do, and keep hammering home that message. You need to see a message 22 times before it resonates, before you understand it, before you listen to it, before you remember it. 22 times.
So it's not surprising we have so much overload, is it?
Exactly.
Yeah. I think a call out, Karen, I'm going to come to you on this, but I think a call out here is for our audiences. If you had to consider what is the one thing you want your employees to do this year, what is the 5 vegetables you want them to eat or stop smoking or whatever, what is the one thing you want them to do? Because I think, unfortunately, with sustainability, we tell them all the problems and then don't tell them the solution of what they need to do. Or a bit like those sort of memes we see where we go, I'm doing dry January, and I'm drinking water, and I'm exercising, and I'm eating and I'm trying to do all of this, and you just see this frazzled person, and I don't think we want to be saying that to people, like recycle this, do that, do this. I mean, all of those things are great, but what is the one thing we would want them to do? So, Karen, I don't know if I can put that over to you, because I'm definitely not going to put you on the spot and say, what is the one thing that we should get people to do? But is there anything you're thinking there about this sort of overload and the noise and how we could be more effective?
Yeah, I mean, though it's true. I think, if we kept sort of scrolling all day and looking at every bit of communication that came our way, our heads would be spinning. So, I mean, for me, it's always go back to the objective and the strategy that your organization is trying to achieve, or what you're trying to achieve in your week or day or tasks, and make sure that any content that you're creating always ladders back to how is it going to create the most impact. But in terms of the kind of digesting and receiving so much communication every day, I mean, I personally just allow myself different sections in the day to look and then block out, because if I had everything on all day, it would just be, pinging all day long. So it's kind of like sections where I'm going to put that work into practice. But then, as we know, working in comms and corporate affairs, it moves so quickly, the external agenda. So we need to be on the money all the time. And, you can get quite obsessed about it, particularly in this news agenda. But then, that can become quite unproductive. So, it's also looking at which sources you want to follow and be influenced by, because it's quite easy to be influenced by others. But also good to get out of your own echo chamber. I am all for that as well. That can be really helpful in terms of what you're trying to achieve.
Yeah, So I think our takeaways on this then are, listen, we are part of the problem here as communicators, because we are creating that 300 feet of content and, you know, and more. And we are making those messages go out 22 times. But I suppose what I'm really taking away is, let's be really clear and effective in our communication, so that everything we are doing is not just being scrolled past, but actually going, this is the 5 a day that you need to, that's the behavior change you need, and being super clear on it. I know we're going to run out of time, so I'm just going to say, if anyone wants to pop any questions in the chat, they're welcome to. I guess my sort of, one of my final questions to you both is, if we are going to go into this year with optimism, is there anything you would suggest to our audience to sort of stop, start and continue when it comes to their comms this year? What advice are we going to give them as a final practical piece?
I would say stop the bland.
Yes.
Stop, you know, it's so easy to just put out a message that has no relevance, you know, to any of what your organization is actually working towards when it comes to, you know, sustainability. And I think that comes because often sustainability sits separate to business strategy. So there might be a bigger job to do in bringing those two things together that we talked about right at the top. But stop the bland messaging and really think back to your, you know, training as a comms professional, marketing professional. When your audience reads your content or listens to your content, consumes your content, they're thinking, what's in it for me? And unless you can answer that question, it's so fundamental and so basic, but unless you can answer that question, then you will not get the engagement that you deserve.
And I think a lovely practical example you gave of that earlier on was, you know, when it comes to your community fridge, it's not all about the carbon that we're saving and the food that's not going into landfill. It's about, actually, you might meet somebody, but you might also get some free food. And that's not a bad thing. You know, you've done your piece. So that's what's in it for them. And Karen, what do you think about what we should stop, start and continue?
I think this has to be about, well, for me, it's about ruthless prioritization internally. And this is not an easy thing to achieve, because I think there's so many, like I said, there's so much going on in the external agenda on this. And there's so many usually stakeholders that want so many different things, particularly in really large organizations. But I think, as we said, less is more. The pieces that we do have to link to the business strategy and the most impact. But to kind of get out of this clutter of communication, I think it's about prioritizing, having the difficult conversations and creating the content and the stories that are going to have the most impact and cut through. And look at the ROI on it, because that should tell you. You know, take the data into the conversations. That's what I like doing.
Yeah. I can see we've already got a fantastic question from Wendy, and I'm quite inspired to answer it. Is net zero by 2040 too bland for internal messaging? And already I'm bubbling with answers to this, because I think the first thing is, and I think we touched on it earlier on, about the journey to somewhere. And I think that comment of net zero by 2040, it epitomizes some of what I worry about, which is, here's this massive ambition. Now, what is it you actually want me to do? So I don't think it's necessarily bland, depending on what your business has to do to get to achieve that. That might be a really exciting, you know, proposition. But I think as a frontline employee, or any employee, I think I would first of all need to answer that with, what's the 5 a day thing that I have to do, that you have to probably tell me 22 times to get me to do something? What do you guys think about this? Is it, the bland piece was yours. Is it too bland?
Well, I think first of all, you've got, do your employees know what net zero means?
Yeah.
And what does it mean for them in their role?
Yeah.
Is, you know, if you want to launch that as a goal, and you are a really pioneering, ambitious, entrepreneurial business, and you have lots of other kind of similar goals, and it feels believable, then that's great. But if this is launched as a goal where actually you're normally quite a conservative, risk averse business, then perhaps there might be some discrepancy with, do people actually believe that you can get there, or is that just a nice headline figure? So I think really get into and ask your employees, talk to your teams about it, because they're going to be the ones delivering it. So exactly as Sally said, if you can get into the piece of what's the bridge between that goal and that, I'm a receptionist, how do I deliver this in my day to day? But really make sure that people have a full understanding of what net zero means. Else come up with the story that they do understand that translates to the same thing.
I'm somewhat suspicious as well when we just round up numbers 2030, 2040, 2050. It sort of feels like we've done it because it's far enough away to not know the answer yet, and therefore just magically be achievable. Because if we had really structured plans that told us what it is we had to do between now and net zero, I think it would probably come out at 2038 on the 11th month or something like that. It wouldn't just magically come out at 2040. So I think I'd probably want to know what has led us to that comment. Is that an ambition, or have we actually got a plan for it? We've got a couple of other questions, and I'm going to take a couple if I can. What about sharing the challenges of reaching the sustainability targets? Is that relevant for employees? Wow, yes, it is.
Yeah.
But Karen, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think those employees have helped you to get there. So and quite often reaching those sustainability targets or goals, that's some hard graft. These are not easy things to achieve. So in my experience, it's absolutely right to share with employees how you've got there. What were the levers, what were the trade-offs, and who helped us to get there, and what was it like to live through that. So I think this can be a really tangible visual story that engages communities in organizations really, really well, and ultimately it's a real success story to share, and encourages more of that, and people to share more stories and how they've achieved that. So I think absolutely it's fabulous for morale and internal engagement to share that.
I'd also say use it as a springboard for conversation, because this isn't, people work within organizations because they want to contribute to something else. So we've moved out of this time where the team up high could kind of broadcast their messages down the line. It doesn't work like that now people want to feel that they're listened to, that they're heard. I spend a lot of time working with businesses to help them to do that listening piece, and the amount of fantastic content that you get, ideas, suggestions, solutions to problems that people, business leaders wouldn't automatically see, because you're having those conversations. So I use it as a way really to open up the floor, to invite those conversations collaboratively to happen as well.
I 100% agree. And a great tangible example for you on that would be, if you've got an organization and there's lots of, there's a warehouse or there's a factory or there's something like that, and you've got to cut energy by a certain amount, and that's part and parcel of this journey. I would use visual language to show people really what that looks like. That would be the equivalent of turning our machines off on the third month of the year, and the 7 other months, or however many other months, not having any energy. So we are looking for, this is an obstacle for us and a challenge. We are looking for every opportunity to help us to understand how we can reduce energy. And if we can talk to our frontliners in that way, I think you're going to get all of these. Did you realize we use this machine like this, and we could turn it off at that point, and we could do this, and we can do that? I know one of our printing manufacturers that we work with, they had a thing about water, And they got so clever with how they preserved water, because their printing machines needed a huge amount of water. So they recycled it, and they said, oh, you know what? One of our inkjet things that comes in a really small, like plastic sort of container, and it wastes loads of water. So why don't we build our own and we'll manufacture it? And they 3D printed a different container that could use the water again, and things like that. And you'll just get so much more creativity from the people doing the work. I know we've got more questions coming in, and I'm happy to stay on the line, but I think I ought to wrap up because we are 4 minutes near to the end. So I'm just going to say we could probably talk about this all day long, and I know certainly I've got the passion to do so. But if you want to carry on this conversation, I think I wanted to just wrap up with 3 sort of suggested ways that you could keep the conversation going. Because I do, as I said at the beginning, think that better communication and conversations in this area is going to help us with action. The first thing you can do is you can use this QR code on the screen. We have created a little guide for a net walk or a walk and talk, or however you want to do it. I started the day with a beautiful walk with about 15 other people locally, and we had wonderful conversations as we walked around a lake. A great way to start the day this morning, and it didn't even rain. So that was fantastic. But you could have your own net walk, and it doesn't have to be on Green Monday. You can do it any day. But when you walk and you get out into nature, you really do start reminding yourself of what work needs to be done. So the second thing you can do is you can join our community. We meet on a community call every month, and we also have webinars like today's topic, and we have all sorts of other conversations. And what we're trying to do is make workplaces fairer, healthier, and happier. And I think as AI and robots and all sorts of automation comes in, the most important thing we can do is remember our humanity, because it is, and for those that haven't heard me say this before, it's not the planet we're trying to solve. The planet's absolutely fine. It's us humans that we need to sustain and maintain. So let's just make sure that we're happier, healthier, and having fairer workplaces. So do join that. And if you want to keep the conversation going with any of the 3 of us, these are our LinkedIn profiles. You're really welcome to keep on having conversations with all of us, and we will carry on answering those questions when we can. Only in our slots though, Karen, when we go onto LinkedIn. Otherwise we'd be on LinkedIn all day long and get overloaded, which we really could be, because we're scrolling through 300 feet of content. But yeah, so do carry on the conversation with us. I will just pop back to a couple of these questions though. So from an AI perspective, in an AI world, how do we communicate so that messages are understood and questioned, not just received? And I think this is about our overload and remembering that 300 feet of stuff that we're scrolling through. Because to Toya's point, we can't just scroll through it, because if we're just going to scroll through it, then how many actions would we see in that 300 feet every time we go back in and scroll through any platform? Yeah, so in an AI world, how do we make our comms not just received? What do you guys think on this one?
I was going to say it's not just the actions; it's about the relevance of the communication to me as an individual. So I think it's about deeply understanding your audiences. What motivates them? What do they care about? What are they passionate about? And, not just settling for demographics that are like, oh, this is Victoria. She's a mum of 2. She lives in Surrey. She's sustainability minded, so she buys these brands. Actually, there are whole other things that will connect me to people that I would never, ever normally have put myself in the same bucket with. And it's understanding those messages that will help you to get the cut through, because you're right, we see so much, So it's really about deeply understanding the motivations for each of those audiences, and it might not be what you think it is. I was having a really interesting conversation with a researcher last week, and we were talking about consumer research is actually really poor at the moment, simply because we're not asking the right questions. And I think when you can ask, and that's the same for AI, right? We get poor results when we don't ask it a good question. So I think really spend the time thinking about what are the questions that you want to really answer that will really help you to elevate your communication so that you can understand your audiences better and get the results that you want.
Yeah, I think we have to wrap up anyway. And for anyone that has to leave the call, thank you. I've seen the chat with people having to leave, and so no problem. We are 1 minute past, so I will wrap up. But a massive thank you, and everyone that's on the call, if you can give me a bit of help to say massively thank you to Karen and Victoria, or Tors, because you had epic takeaways there, and thank you so much for sharing all your thoughts. I think that was a really insightful discussion. We'll have to have it again next year. And I wish everybody on the call to have a great year with their sustainability comms. I'm sure my colleague Charlie will write up our conversation, but I definitely think less buzzwords and jargon, more trust, definitely some more courage, more emotion, and perhaps backed up by science, but less scientific communication. And of course, down to your last point there, Tors, about relevance and, leaning into our audiences. There's so many good pieces of advice in all of this. And here's to progress, I would say, for 2026 and action.
Absolutely.
So a massive thank you to both of you.
Thank you, Sally.
Yeah, thank you to everybody that's joined us as well, because I'm encouraged that you all have taken an hour out on a Monday to listen in, and hopefully this has been worthwhile and you've got some tangible things written down to go, right, let's go and find that courage and take care of our own narratives, hopefully. And we've got a reservoir of goodwill. I still love this. I still love this because it's so visual to me that we've got all this goodwill. I mean, if there's 100 volunteers just in Hazelmere, Tours, goodness knows what we've got in our workforces. We must have all of these people who are desperate to help. So thank you so much for today.